today we're going to start curing some salmon. All right, we're going to make two different dishes today. One is called gravlax, which is a sort of a Nordic dish. Do you guys understand the term Nordic? Sweden, Iceland, Norway, Denmark, that area of the world, yeah? So we're going to start with this guy here. So this is an Atlantic salmon farm. Okay, you can actually last week about farm fish and the tails. Can you guys see that tail? You see how it's got lots of nicks and cuts out of it? Can you see that? You see that? It should be a nice big fan, right? But you see this thing has lots of cracks and bites and nicks out of it. And that's what I mentioned last week about farm fishing, is that they're crammed into these pens and they end up sort of biting on each other a little bit because that's how they look around. And you guys remember the ways to tell for fresh fish? Well, what are some of them? Eyes. What should the eye? What about the eyes?
Bright, clear.
Bright, clear, and bulging. Yeah, right. What should they not be?
Gray.
Gray, yeah. Dark gray, sunken in, right? Caved in. Okay, so that's one thing. What else?
Gills supposed to be red.
Gills, yeah. What about them?
Red.
Red, bright red, right? What should they not be?
Black.
Black or muddy looking, right? What else?
It shouldn't be slimy.
Yeah. And this one's not slimy. It's okay. It's a little bit slimy. That's because it's been transported in a styrofoam box, so that's fine.
Smell.
Yeah.
It shouldn't smell too fishy.
Shouldn't. Yeah. What should it smell like?
Sea and cucumbers.
Water.
Well, what does a cucumber smell like? Don't use. When you're trying to explain to somebody how something should smell, don't use something so obscure like a cucumber. A fish should smell like a cucumber. So does that mean a cucumber should smell like a fish? Right? Try to keep things a little more easy to understand. Seawater, right? Not like the harbor, like the fish market. That smells like fish, right? Because that's all the dead fish. Right? It should smell like clean ocean air, right? That's what you want the fish to smell like. So these eyes are pretty good. They're not super bulging, but again, like I said, this is an import fish, so it's been dead for a couple days. But the gills are not too bad. They're still, you can see some of the blood there still. It's quite red, right? Right, so that's a pretty good sign. We've got some good color on the gills. The eyes aren't bad. Like I said, it's not slimy. The skin's still pretty smooth, pretty nice. So it's not so bad, okay? In fact, it's quite nice. We're not going to scale this fish, actually. Generally speaking, when you smoke fish or cure fish, you just don't scale it, okay? So I'm just going to dry it off real nice. Also, what else are we looking for? The meat. What about the meat?
Should be bouncy.
Bouncy, like a basketball?
Bouncy.
No. Use a different terminology. Bouncy is not a good term. Begin with an F. Sorry?
Taut.
Firm. Hard is like Boss's skull. Yeah, that's hard.
Why is it taut?
Todd?
Taut.
Taut? That's no one here is going to understand what that means. And taut's more like for the tightness of a rope, But firm, yeah, firm or springy, okay? But firm is good, right? What should it not do?
Sunk in and never come back.
Sorry?
It sunk in and never come back.
Sunk in and never come back?
You sunk.
Where do you think your finger's going? The upside down? What is it, Stranger Things? Your finger will come back, sure, yes. But I understand what you're saying. When you push the meat in, the meat collapses, right? It becomes soft and mushy, right? Yes, you don't want that. What else are we looking for? So we got the eyes, we got the gills, we got the skin, right? What about the belly?
You're saying
No,
rigor
the belly.
mortis.
Yeah, no. The belly. This is going to be, there's no way this is going to be firm. Remember before I said a really fresh fish will still be quite rigid? But this is from a different country, right? So it's hard enough for us to get local fish in Taiwan fresh, let alone getting an import fish fresh. Okay? What about the belly? When you look inside the belly, if it's been gutted already, what am I looking for?
Blood.
What am I looking for?
Blood should have been black.
Sorry?
Blood should have been black.
Should be black?
Shouldn't.
Shouldn't, yes. The blood should not be dark colored, right? Same as the gills, right? Anytime blood is black, that means that it's been oxidized, right? And that's something we do not want to see. Okay, we always want to have a nice, fresh-looking fish. Also, when you touch the skin, okay, you should also, so now I've dried it off, right? But that doesn't mean the fish is dry, right? Remember, there's a lot of water in fish, right? So when you touch the skin, right now, it's not slimy, okay, but it's still moist, okay? So it's got a nice, moist, the skin is still moist, it's smooth, but not slimy, okay? So these are all factors that we're looking for when we look for fresh fish, all right? So please remember that. And seeing as how there's a few people who haven't done the midterm exam, next week we'll go through the questions and talk about the answers and whatnot. So just like before, I'm going to take the collar off the head here, the collar and the head off, so I'm just going to go down. When you're dealing with large fish, it's best to pick them up by the tail, okay, to move them around. And you also want to, like I said, fish are moist, right? Naturally moist. So I usually use a towel. It makes it easier to hang on to, right? But try to pick them up by the tail, okay? Don't grab them by the belly. Don't grab them by the head. Okay? Remember that fish is still fragile, okay? And so you need to treat it with a little bit of care, okay? Sometimes I see people, you know, they butcher fish and they're flipping it around and flopping it all over the place, you know? I'm like, just take it easy, okay? Like the fish still has feelings, even though it's dead. So again, I'm just going to go in behind the fin here, and the collar is right behind the gill here, okay? This round fish and flat fish have different anatomies, okay? But all round fish basically have the same anatomy, that the collar right here is always right behind the gill, okay? Remember what the 4 different categories of fish are? What are they?
Lean or fat?
Let's first start with the type. Round or flat? So what's the difference between the two? A round has how many fillets? 2. And a flat has 4. Remember, the round fish, the eyes are on each side of its head, right? Down the spine, down the center line. What about a flat fish?
It's on one side.
Yeah, it's on the top side of its head, right? Okay, so we got round and flat. What else? Fresh versus seawater, right? Salt versus fresh, right? Even though salmon is born and returns to freshwater, we consider it to be a saltwater fish because it spends 99% of its life roughly in salt water, right? So we have freshwater and we have saltwater. And what else? What was that? Okay.
Lean or fat?
Lean or fat. Yeah, so lean fish versus fatty fish. And what would be an example of a lean fish? Sea bass, right? So I got my head off here. I have one student in ICA 4A. I remember when we did this with her, she was like, oh, do you want that head? I was like, no. She's like, can I take it home? I was like, yeah, sure. Apparently she went to the dorm and made fish head soup. So, yeah, but I'm sure the other people on the dorm are super happy. Because now her whole dormitory just stinks like fish heads. But she was pretty happy. So we take the head off. There's still some meat in here, which I'll take out after, okay? All right. So we got lean and fat, right? So we got a sea bass as an example of a lean fish. And what about a fatty fish? Okay, what about other than salmon? Tuna, very good, right? Tuna is actually a bit of both. Tuna is very lean up top and very, very fatty by the belly, but we still consider it to be a fatty fish. Okay, and then what's the other category? Specialty and mass market. So what's an example of a mass market? Salmon, right? What's another one? Begins with T. Tilapia. You guys might remember from last class we were talking about farm fish, right? tilapia is one of the most, if not the most, farmed fish on Earth. Okay, it's extremely heavily farmed. Okay, so that's good. So now for this fish here, I'm just going to lift up the belly. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. Okay, everybody has their own way. Some people like to go in from the back side here and come towards the belly. Okay, I like to just go straight down the spine here and take off the fillet. Okay, there's no right or wrong way. It's just whatever way is comfortable to you, right? So I'm just going to go now. I don't know if you can see. Well, I'll just move this here. Can you guys see here that white bone? Yeah, that's the spine, right? That white bone is the spine here for the fish, and that controls its movements, right? And just like us, we have a spine going from top to bottom to our hips, right? Obviously, a fish doesn't have hips, right? A fish's hips don't lie. So, obviously, it runs for the entire section of the body, from head to tail. So now I'm just going to take the belly up. It's important if you're going to do it this way. Like I said, there's no right or wrong way, right? Whatever way you're comfortable this way, so I'm comfortable doing this way. If you're going to do it this way, it's important to lift the belly up, right? You don't want to leave the belly down and go like this because you're going to end up cutting through the fatty part of the belly, right? Which is never good, okay? So I'm just going to go right now through the, and can you hear that noise there, that little popping sound? So that's the rib bones getting snapped, okay? And I'm just keeping my knife perpendicular. And of course, it's important to have a nice sharp knife here for this. Once the fillet comes off, carefully pick it up, okay? And then we've got our first salmon fillet, okay? Now this part here, I'm going to use a spoon. Now there's lots of, I see lots of guys on Instagram and different things that have all these fancy tools. Do you have your own fan? Nice. Yeah, I respect that. Respect that. Man knows when he's hot, man knows when he wants to get cool. I've seen there's lots of different tools you can buy for doing this. There's like these special little handheld tools that sort of have like a curved edge and you can use them to scrape, right? Here's a handheld tool that's got a curved edge. It can scrape. I don't see the point of having all these special tools. Like having a pair of fish tweezers, you probably want that because it makes the job a lot easier. Okay? You're not going to want to use your hands. I see people with like needle nose pliers and stuff like that. And needle nose pliers are fine, but you know, maybe one day somebody uses them to fix something in a kitchen and then they put them back into your toolbox and you know. Anyways, I'm going to take my spoon here and I'm just going to run down the carcass here. So again, this is also really important because remember how expensive salmon is. Jonathan, do you remember how much the salmon cost?
$2,500.
Speak up, please.
2,500.
2,500 NT, okay, for this whole fish, okay? So it's important to make sure that you try to get as much of this meat off of the carcass as possible, okay? And I'll finish that up in a minute. I'll get this out of Lucy's way. I don't want her to get all angry at me. Regular, so again, I'm just going to use my towel. I'm just going to flip this over. And again, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but this time the opposite direction. Okay? So before the belly was facing me, now the belly is facing away. The reason I flipped it the other side is because I'm a right-handed, right? If I had it this way with the belly facing towards me, I'd have to try and do like this or something, and that's awkward, okay? So again, I'm going to keep the belly up, okay? There's my spine, okay, right? So again, there's my spine bone, so I want to get my knife right against that. And again, just going right through here. Keeping your knife as parallel to the cutting board as possible. again, gently picking it up. And now I've got my second fillet of salmon, okay? So now at the end of the carcass here, I'm going to take, again, my trusty tool called a spoon. And I'm just going to use this to get the last bit of this meat out of here. And do you guys like oysters? We talked about this before, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll find a time to do an oyster class as well, but it'll be later in the course. And what we'll do with this salmon is next week we'll make salmon cakes. And we'll just have some pan-fried salmon cakes as a snack while we make our Weisswurst sausage. So again, you can see how much fish I've gotten off here. So when you're finished with your carcass, it should look something like this. Okay, you see there's very, very little, basically no meat left on there. Okay? Now this, a lot of people, classically a lot of people wouldn't use this for fish stock, okay, because it's too oily. Alright? Me, I don't like to throw things away. I'm kind of cheap like that. If I was working in a large hotel and we were getting 10, 20 of these every week, I would make consomme out of this. Okay, do you guys know what consomme is? Everyone here knows what consomme is? No? Consomme is a French soup preparation where you take stock and you add a meat and egg white and you cook it together, and the result is a clear liquid. Very, very clear, like apple juice. Okay? Now there's a few different ways you can do that. I'm not going to keep this carcass because we don't need it for anything, so I'm just going to go like that. Go like that. And get rid of it, and the head I'll take care of in a minute. And in basic Western, we'll make chicken consomme in a slightly modified fashion, and I'll explain that to you guys next semester if you take basic Western, because the traditional method for making consomme is quite long. You have to make a stock one day, then cool it down, then you have to slowly heat up the cold stock with your meat and egg white mixture. I prefer just to make my stock and add in my meat and egg white mixture while it's still hot. So I can make a consomme in half the time. That's the traditional way. There's also quite a few modern techniques for making very clear consommes that involve using agar or even freezing the liquid. So you can take a stock, whether it's salmon stock or chicken stock or even pineapple juice. Okay, you blend pineapple juice, it becomes very cloudy, right? You boil that with agar, you put it in the freezer, you take it out, put it into a strainer and let it drain, and the resulting liquid is totally clear. Okay? Like crystal clear, almost like water, but it tastes like pineapple. So there's a lot of different ways you can make consommes or clear liquids. So again, I'm going to go through here, I'm just going to take out some of this back meat here from the collar. And this is a very popular section of fish. So in a lot of Japanese restaurants and stuff, you'll see that they'll have the fish collar on the menu, right? And that's just this part here from behind the gill, and it's usually barbecued, right? But I'm not going to bother with that because I don't need it. Okay, so now we've got our salmon trimming, which we're going to use to make some salmon cakes next week, some salmon prawn cakes. And I'm just going to clean off my cutting board again, and then we're going to start to bone out this salmon and start to get it curing. All right. grab one different knife, just so I can trim the belly up here a little bit. And then I'll explain to you a little bit about the different sections of salmon. So before we use the fish, I want to take these bones out here. These are called pin bones. Okay? So there's two sets of bones. The rib bones running up the belly here need to come out. Okay? So along the white fatty part of the belly up the cage here, there's the rib bones. Those we're going to use a knife to cut out. Okay? But then up here, there's a series of bones called pin bones. Can you see those just poking up now? Can you see those poking up off the surface of the fish at all? Just right here, there's a white line of bones. Those are called the pin bones. And we also want to take those out. So what I'm going to do is just using my tweezers, I'm just going to grab the bone. Now, some people just go in very quickly and start pulling. What happens is big chunks of meat come out. Okay? Or, if it's done by a machine, you'll see a line down here where the machine is just going and taking all the bones out and a bunch of meat out. Okay? So you'll see that quite often in supermarkets. So I'm just using my fingers and my thumb to keep the meat anchored so that it doesn't come out with my bone. As a fish gets older, the meat gets softer, right? So as you start pulling these bones out, if you're not careful, you could get large chunks of meat coming out with it. So that's why it's important to take a little bit of care when you're pulling these out. Okay, so that's all of our pin bones out. And now I'm just going to go through and take our rib bones away. I'm just using a knife and I'm going just underneath the bones here. Again, because I want to keep as much of the fish intact as possible. As you go, as you go underneath the rib cage here, to where the fatty part is, you should be able to see your knife going underneath, okay? If you can't see your knife, it means you've gone too far down into the meat. You understand what I mean? So I'm just using my knife, and I'm just pressing it very gently, and I can just see the blade. That belly I'm going to use later for our cakes as well. So the salmon basically has a few different parts here. Okay, there's the belly section, which is much fattier, like tuna. Right? There's the head, there's the loin, and there's the tail. Okay. So I'm going to split ours into a couple different pieces here. So what I'm going to first do is just because I want it to cure evenly, so I'm going to take some of this belly off. And that belly, like I said, I'll use it for our salmon cakes next week. So now I've got a nice trimmed loin here, and I'm going to just strip it right down about in the middle here. And I'm going to put the tail section in here. And I'll put the supreme section, or the top section, into another container. Okay, the exact same thing with my other fillet here. Again, picking it up carefully, supporting its weight, right? I don't want to just pick it up with one hand. I want to make sure that my fish is well taken care of. And so again, we're going to do the exact same process. Using my hand, I'm just going to go in here and push back my pin bones. So the pin bones run towards the head at an angle, okay? And if you go backwards, you can feel them all. You can push them up. See how they kind of rise up like that? Can you guys see that at all? You see how the bones are just kind of poking through there? So that'll make it easier for me to locate them and get them out, okay? So exact same process as before. Use your pliers or your tweezers, your fish tweezers. And just pull these pin bones out. And actually you can also tell how fresh a fish is also by how easy the pin bones come out. If they come out really easily, that means the fish is older, right? Because the meat is starting to get soft. And this one is actually pretty good. Some of the pin bones are quite tough to get out. So that's a good sign that this fish is not that old. Okay, so that's all of our pin bones out. Has anyone here ever gone fishing for salmon before? It's they're quite a large fish to catch. Some of them, 30, 40 kilos. Some of the bigger ones, fish are all muscle, right? So to pull one in, it's quite a workout. All right. So same thing. I'm just gonna go. I got a little bit high here on my rib cage, so I'm just gonna go through and just take this off. And again, just go down the belly section here. Keeping a nice, smooth line as you cut. So there's another thing you can do, which I'm doing here on this one. And I'll show you the difference in just a sec, or I'll explain to you the difference in just a sec. So the first fillet, I went down, I took the entire white belly section off, right? The second fillet, I just took the rib bones out, but I left the belly on, okay? So depending on what you're doing, so like today, we're gonna cure this salmon. I don't wanna use the belly so much for the curing, because it's too thin. And the belly I'll use for our salmon cakes for next week. So I take that off, because I don't want it for my curing, okay? But if you were, some people cure with the whole belly on, some people cure with the belly off. It really depends on what you're making and who's making it, right? Everybody's a bit different. So as I said, I'm going to take this off, so I'm just going to take it off right about here. And this belly I will trim up after. The exact same thing as before. I want to take the head section or the loin section, and I'll cut this roughly in the middle. So this we're going to use for our smoked salmon, okay? And the tails we're going to use for our crab legs. If you were going to use this in a restaurant, if I was not going to cure this and I was serving it in a restaurant, again, there's different options. If I was in like a sort of a lower price point option, like a casual restaurant, you know, like for example, like TGIF or something like that, you would probably find the whole fillet portion all the way to the tail, right? But if I was in like an upscale or a fine dining place or a slightly higher price check, I would use the first part of the section until it gets to about here. This tail section I would use for something else, like fish cakes, soup, something like that, okay? I wouldn't use this for customers because it's a bit tougher. It's the end of the tail where the fin is. Okay, so this piece is usually reserved for other uses, okay? Another reason is because, think about if you went to a restaurant, right? Let's say you guys went to a restaurant, okay, together. I don't know why you go together, but let's say you guys did go together for some bizarre reason. And let's say you both, because you're not very creative, you're like, oh, I'll get the salmon. And boss is like, you know what, I'll get the salmon too because you're getting the salmon, right? And then you both got the salmon, right? And one of you got this part, right, as your portion, and another one got a really nice piece from this section, right? Now they weigh the same, right? Let's say they're both 200 grams, right? But whose do you think looks better? This one, right? So boss is going to be like, ooh, why did I get the tail section? Right? So it's also for consistency reasons, right? Consumers are very picky or fickle about food, you know? When they look at it, they make a judgment, right? They don't necessarily always think about the price they're paying, they think about the product they're getting first, right? Unfortunately. All right, now we're going to carry on here. Just move this for now. So now we're going to start to cure our fish. All right. So for our gravlax, we've got salt and sugar, equal parts. Okay, equal parts, 1 to 1. Okay. So we're going to mix this. I'll just get a small mixing bowl so that'll make it easier. So I just want to mix this together. I've also got some mustard seeds. I've got a fresh lemon, and I've got some fresh dill. Before I do that, what I'm going to do is just pour a little bit of vodka and brandy. That's nice. Clean towel. Anyways, let me get a different clean towel. I've got a little bit of vodka here, and I've got a little bit of brandy, okay? And the alcohol mainly works for not so much flavoring, a little bit of flavoring, but mostly to kill parasites or viruses or bacteria that's in here. Viruses that wouldn't be in here, but parasites is very common in fish, right? So I'm going to use a little bit of vodka and just splash that over. And this isn't really vodka, I think it's more like Galliard. That's just, they just put vodka on it, but really inside is Galliard. Have you guys ever seen a Galliard commercial? I know you guys probably have, right? Have you ever seen those commercials? You know the guys, like usually like 2 or 3 guys, they're all wearing nice suits, and they're like, yeah, life is so rad. And they get some Galliard, they're like, oh, it's so good, right? I guarantee you, I've lived in this country 15 years, and I've drank Galliard before. I've never seen anyone go Galliard. Normally it's like, right? I have yet to see in my life in Taiwan anyone be happy after drinking Galliard. It's normally like, oh, what was that? Was that from your car? Is that gasoline? Then I'm going to put a little brandy or cognac, because that just makes everything great. Okay, so in here, actually that wouldn't be a good idea. A little worse for the wear today. All right, now I've got some yellow mustard seeds. I'm just going to gently sprinkle these. So that's for flavor. And now, so some recipes for making gravlax, they say to put some salt in the bottom of the pan, and then put your fish in, and then put more salt on top. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing at all wrong with that, okay? But this is going to sit in the fridge for 2 days, and I'm going to turn it every 12 hours. So inevitably, it's all going to get covered in salt water. Because within about 2 hours, the water from the fish is going to come out, and it's going to be full of salt water, right? So I can't be bothered. I just put it on, no big deal for me. So I'm just going to liberally sprinkle half of the salt and sugar mixture onto each of the fillets. Just like that. I'm going to take a lemon here, and I'm just going to slice off the peel. I don't really want the juice, okay? I don't want the acid in there, but I want the peel just for flavor. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit of the lemon peel on here. Then I'm going to take roughly half of my dill. I'm going to cure your phone in salt and sugar if I hear that again. Does anyone want this lemon? You going to eat it? Oh. Because I remember I had one class before, one girl, she just really loved lemons. And I'd have like an extra lemon. She'd be like, "Oh, you're gonna use that?" I'm like, "No." She's like, "Great." She just eats it. I was like, "What the hell?
Vitamin C.
What's going on here? Am I being punked?" It was quite. I was like, "Wow, that's impressive." You must feel no pain.
No pain, no peach.
I guess. Yeah. I don't know. Winter's coming. So I was shocked actually. I was shocked and impressed. Anyways, so this dill, I'm just going to roughly cut it because it's going to come off anyways after. Okay, so this is also just to help flavor our gravlax. And then the other dill that I have left over, so you'll see in your recipe dill is labeled twice, right? Generally speaking, if you see a recipe that has the same ingredient listed twice, that means it's for two different reasons, right? It's not just, nobody would put 30 grams and 30 grams for fun. There's two different reasons they have dill, right? So you have to read the method first. So this is going to cure now for roughly 2 days. Okay? Makes sense, yeah? After 2 days, I'm going to wash off the brine, okay, the cure that's on there. I'm going to just pat it down gently. I'm going to take more chopped parsley. I keep calling it parsley. Or chopped dill, but very finely chopped, and extra mustard seeds, and that's going to be the garnish on the fish. Okay? Understand? So 48 hours, turning every couple hours, and then I'm going to take it out. All right? So that's our salmon gravlax, okay? Which is cured, eaten, cured, totally fine. Okay? No problem. Okay? Now we're going to get on to our smoked salmon. So this one, again, basically same, almost identical process. I got salt and sugar. I have some pickling spice here, which I guess you guys will remember from last time. You guys made a huge amount of. So your recipe will say black peppercorns, fennel seeds, mustard seeds. So I've got all that in here. So I'm going to take a little bit of this mixture. Put a little bit of that in there. I'm also going to add a small amount of cure number 2. Which I think your recipe is about 2 or 3 grams maybe. 2.5 grams, which is about a very, very small spoonful. Again, I've done this many times. I'm fairly good at guesstimating weights. And again, we're going to mix this together really well. And we're going to do the exact same things we did with the other salmon. Once this is really well mixed. We're just going to coat evenly both sides, or the flesh side of the fish, and exact same process. We're going to cure this for 2 days, flipping it every 12 hours, roughly every 12 hours. This is going to go underneath. This is going to go into the fridge. I'm also going to put a couple cans on here just to even out the weight. You don't have to weight the salmon down, okay? You can leave it just like this, it's fine. Or you can add a weight to it. Can anyone guess what the weight does?
Keeps it inside the brine.
Sorry?
It keeps it down into the brine, right?
It'll be in the brine anyway. It's just gravity is strong enough for that. There's another reason though. Think about if I have a wet kitchen sponge, right? Two of them. I have one here and I have one here, and I put a weight on it. What comes out of which sponge more?
That's the water up.
Water, right? So if I put a weight on that, what's it going to do?
That's the water.
Putting pressure on the salmon, right? The more pressure on the salmon, the more water is expelled. So if you want to have a drier, final product, you add a weight and it'll expel more of the moisture out of the salmon, so that your final product is a little drier on the palate. Okay, not so mushy and not so wet. And I prefer to have my smoked salmon and gravlax a little drier, not so sashimi-like. Okay? Any questions about that? Great. So now, like I said, we're going to take this. Does anyone want this fish head? Nobody wants the fish head?
Can make it.
You want the fish head?
Yes.
There's always somebody. There's always one person who wants to go back to their apartments and make some weird spells or incantations or something. Eye of newt, hair of boss, fish head soup. Yeah, something like that. So I'm just going to take my salmon here, and I'm just going to run my knife under. I didn't do a very good job there, but I'm just going to take the skin off real quick. And then this I'm just going to butcher up to the salmon to make salmon cakes next week, okay? So next week we'll have Weisswurst sausage, and we'll have spätzle, and we'll make sauerkraut. You guys remember we started sauerkraut at the beginning of the semester? Yeah, so we'll have that. And we'll have some salmon cakes as well. So quite a bit of eating next week. This belly you can also smoke as well. It's quite good smoked, but I would only smoke it if I had a lot of them. So if we were smoking like 20 salmon or something like that, then I would cure these all separately and smoke them separately, because they're going to cure and smoke at very different times. But I can't be bothered to do that now because we only have one belly and not a lot of time. And this fish I'll be smoking Monday morning in here, and it'll be cold smoked. So remember that there's different ways of smoking, right? Hot and cold. So this salmon I'm just going to dice up. And Jonathan, I'll need to add a couple things on for next week's order. But very little. Maybe nothing actually. We might have everything here. Any questions? Yeah.
When you import fish, is it safe to serve it raw?
Sorry, what was that?
When you import the fish.
When you import a fish?
Yeah. Is it
Import?
safe? Yeah.
What do you mean import? Like catch a fish?
Like,
Yeah.
is it safe to serve fish raw?
Well, probably. I mean, is it safe or are there rules?
Maybe the
there's rules that a lot of countries have about raw fish. So for example, in many North American countries and European countries, fish that's to be served for sashimi has to be frozen to minus 18, I believe, for 7 days, or minus 30 for 2 days. I can't remember the exact. I have it written down in my office. I got my computer. There's a specific, temperature and day relation to freezing fish, and that's to kill parasites that are in there. But if you go to Japan, right, or anywhere that has, really clean water and a good fishing industry. I mean, Japan has problems with their fishing industry, like many places, with overfishing and stuff like that. But if you go to some countries that have very, very clean waters, right, and a good fishing program, so if you have that, you can get really good quality fish that doesn't need to be frozen. You can eat it fresh, right? You don't need to freeze it or anything like that. So it really depends where you're talking about, right? Would I eat fish from the South China Sea straight up? Probably not, right? Because there's so much shipping and container ships and pollution that goes in there. I probably would not eat fish fresh out of the ocean of the South China Sea. But if I was up in Norway or Iceland and someone caught a salmon in the cool, cold waters up there, where there's very little shipping and very little pollution, I would probably be more inclined to eat it raw. Okay, so that's a tough question to answer because it depends really on the product and where you are. But nowadays, most studies have found most fish contain parasites anyways, and pretty much every fish on the planet contains microplastic. You guys know what that is, right? Microplastics. It's all the plastic that gets thrown into the ocean dissolves, right? But it doesn't really dissolve, right? It becomes very, very small particles. And so most fish, almost all fish on the planet now, has been found to contain microplastics, which means that we kind of inherently all contain microplastics now. So yay! That's great. But yeah, good question. Any other questions? Any other questions? Really, not a single question, huh? So if you also look later into your book, so we've talked about now the different categories of fish, right? So there's the different kinds of fish, there's the different categories of fish, there's the fish anatomy, right? So there's the flat fish, round fish, 4 fillet, 2 fillet, that kind of stuff. If you look farther into your book, you'll see the complete skeletal anatomy of a fish. And then you go farther still, and you're going to see sections on shellfish, okay? So, we have different categories, right? Shellfish and fish, they're not the same group, right? There's fin fish, and then there's shellfish, right? You guys know what shellfish are? Yes? That's an example of shellfish. So in shellfish, there's also different categories, okay? So we have, there's crustaceans and mollusks, okay? Crustaceans and mollusks. Mollusks are things like clams, uni, abalone, snails, scallops, yeah, mussels, oysters, octopus, squid, cuttlefish, all that kind of stuff. That's all part of the mollusk family, okay? In the mollusk family, and you'll need to look at this in your book, and it will be on your test for sure. Not your midterm, because that's already too late, but your final exam. Within that family of fish, within the family of mollusks, there's univalves, bivalves, gastropods, and cephalopods. Okay? So for example, a univalve, meaning one shell basically, is something like an abalone. Okay, abalone is one shell, one valve, right? A clam would be an example of a bivalve. It's got 2 shells, right? Mussel, clams, those are all bivalves. gastropod would be something like a snail, a slug, a sea slug, or a whelk. And then a cephalopod would be something like octopus or squid, okay? Having no shells, no bones, no skeletal structure at all. Okay, so there's those categories. You're going to need to look at those, understand what they are. Then there's crustaceans. Can anyone think of an example of what a crustacean would be? Crab, lobster, prawns, shrimp. Shrimp and prawns, remember, are not the same thing, right? Even though people often just use one word or the other word. Crawfish, yeah, langoustine. So these are all examples of crustaceans, okay? There's also a term in your book called molting. Okay, you're going to want to look that up. If you guys have your books here, you're going to want to look now. Identify that word, circle it, because that will also be on your final exam. Molting. Did anyone find that in their book?
Is it the same as when like either birds or like certain reptiles?
Similar, yeah. Similar, yeah. Look in your book, find the process called molting. That's when a crustacean gets rid of its old hard shell for a newer soft one.
Is that when you get soft like soft shell crabs?
No, soft shell crabs are a species of crab. You can catch a crab when it's molting, but that's a little more tricky. So you're going to want to find that process called molting, okay? And you're going to want to remember what it means, because that also will be on your exam. So crustaceans, right? Prawns, shrimp, crab, langoustine or crawfish. Okay, so there's a huge variety of them. Also, lobster. There's only two varieties of true lobster in the world. Okay, the American lobster and the European lobster are the only real lobsters in the world. Okay, if it doesn't have a claw, it's not considered a true lobster. Okay, everything else is considered a slip lobster. Okay, so quite often when you go, who here has been to a wedding in Taiwan or in Asia? You'll often see lobster on the menu, right? But it's just the kind of lobster that just has the tail, right? And the long, spiny lobster style, but no claws, right? So those aren't actually true lobsters. They're considered a family called the slip lobster. So the only true lobsters, not slip. Like, I'm going to wait for you to go down some stairs, I'm going to push you, and I'm going to say, oh, he slipped. I don't know what happened. He just slipped. Weirdest thing. So that's the only real lobster in the world, the two American and European lobster. So you're also going to want to keep a note of that, because that will also be on your final exam. If something is not in your book, but I mention it in class, and I very specifically say that it's going to be on your test, you'd be best to make a note. Yeah, so the fact that the American lobster and the European lobster are the only real lobsters, you're going to want to make a note of that, because that's going to be on your test. It'll also be on your review as well.
Chef,
Yes.
what's the difference between the taste of a blue lobster and a red lobster?
What's the difference between a blue lobster and a... Quite a bit. The species is different. Well, there's all kinds of red lobster. There's only one kind of blue lobster. Right? It's very expensive. It comes from France normally, the areas around France. But they're very rare. But I mean, what do you mean? What's the difference?
Is it
The color.
the
One's
taste?
blue, one's red.
Taste, texture.
So what?
Asking if there's a difference in taste or both. I mean, taste and texture.
Yeah, I guess a little bit. But I mean, tasting lobster, unless you taste lobster all the time, right? You're not going to really notice much of a difference. If somebody put one in front of you, one red one, one blue one, cooked, right? No shells, just two pieces of lobster, and you taste it, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But for like somebody who's an expert or a connoisseur of food, right? Not a foodie, because that term doesn't make sense. Everybody's a foodie. Everyone has to eat. Other than that, you wouldn't really be able to tell too much of a difference. Okay, but the main difference is this: just the price. I mean, they're very expensive, blue lobster, because it's a marketing tool, right? They can keep them live there and sell them as blue lobsters.
Oh yeah.
What?
Finish first.
No, what?
I heard for the lobster it's after a certain years of age, the rest is older is not good enough.
Under 10 years, over 10 years is still old.
There's a 7 kilo lobster.
That's gross. 10 years old as well is quite old for a lobster.
There's nothing but shells.
Huh?
There's nothing but shells. The meat is sensitive.
Well, that's probably a sick lobster then. If there's no meat, that lobster is like sick. A 7 kilo lobster should have a very big tail, but the quality of the meat is no good. What is
The
this?
claw.
What?
The claw. They said the meat is very tough after a certain years.
Yeah, I know that.
So what's this?
Well, again,
That's okay for sorry.
are you asking a question or telling me something?
He's asking what is the latest like age?
What's the oldest age you should get a lobster at? Well, that depends on the species of lobster. So, true lobsters, a couple of years old. They usually go by the weight. So, over a kilo, under 2 kilos is generally the best. Anything over that is really unpleasant to eat. It's really hard to gauge a lobster's age by looking at it, right? They don't carry identification, right? You can't be like, all right, let me see your ID card, Mr. Lobster. Right, so you have to gauge it by weight. Unfortunately, a lot of fisheries now, they just want money, right? So they just don't particularly care too much about the weight. Or you see people all the time on social media posting about these giant lobsters. They're like, look at this thing, right? But it's no good to eat. The meat gets really tough, the meat gets stringy. Okay, it's not very sweet. Lobster is known as being very sweet, right? And I don't mean sweet like candy, but sweet is in sort of a sweet, oceany taste.
So when you're trying to pick out lobster to buy,
Yeah.
what are some things to look for?
There's not so much, I mean, alive.
Well, yes.
Yeah, other than that, there's not like, I mean, you want to make sure it's got all its legs, you want to make sure it's got all its claws intact, right? Usually around a kilo is a nice size. Anything over a kilo, 1.2 kilos is not so bad, but under 2 kilos is pretty good. But there's no real, it's not like fish, right? So it's still alive, right? You're either going to buy lobster alive or frozen. So it's very difficult to tell anything just by looking at it, right? Generally speaking, if the lobster's pregnant, you shouldn't, I mean, a lot of fisheries now, there's laws against catching pregnant lobsters, right? When they pull it up in their trap, they look underneath, under the tail section, and if there's eggs there, they'll put it back, right? Because what kind of idiot would take a lobster out of the ocean that's about to give birth to more lobsters, right? That's just stupid. Unfortunately, it happens, right? People don't always check. But there's no like, as we do with fish, there's like certain things you can look at, right? That's a different process with lobster. Really, you're looking at where is it from, preferably preferably wild lobster, right? Not aquaculture lobster. And if you're looking for true lobster, then you want to get it from either Maine or Canada, or like Boston, like Maine.
Yeah.
You guys know where Maine is? Northeast America, or Montreal, St. Lawrence River of Canada, that area, or from France, the areas around France.
You said cod, wild cod, or rather than agriculture, why is that?
Well, any wild fish is better than aquaculture fish.
So in terms of lobster.
Oh, just the quality of the meat's better. Yeah. Sometimes aquaculture lobsters can have very soft meat, almost mushy in a way, like it's old. It's not old.
Because they don't have a lot of space in there.
No, I think maybe just the feed and the recycled water. And same with the fish, right? Fish meat, farm fish just looks different, tastes different. It's got different texture, just because it's got different makeup of feed and it's the water it's living in is just different than wild. You know. Usually also aquaculture. So lobster from North America is very prized, right? You know, they call it like lobster, right? It's not really Boston lobster. But that North American lobster, you see it all the time on menus here, right? In Asia, they always talk about the Boston lobster, right? That North American variety of lobster is really valuable because the water that it is raised in is extremely deep and cold, right? And that's deep cold water is excellent for fish and shellfish, okay? Some species of fish are good in warm waters. And when I say warm waters, I mean the waters like around Taiwan or the Philippines, right? They're good for certain types of aquaculture, fish, right? Or shellfish. But it's not necessarily the best for bringing over, for example, mussels, right? Black mussels are predominantly in the west coast of North America, and they're great because the water there is Pacific Ocean, deep, cold water, right? And a good current. But a lot of people bring over things like black mussels to the Philippines and try to farm them, but the water in the Philippines is warm and it doesn't have the same kind of current as the Pacific Ocean. And so what you end up with is mussels that take long to grow, and they're usually small, and the meat's kind of small, right? So they're not really quite the same. Okay? Korea grows really good black mussels, but again, Korea has very cold, very far north, right? And they're right on the Pacific Ocean, so they get a lot of good current. When I lived in Korea, I was amazed at how good and cheap the mussels were there. Amazed. I was like, wow, huge bag, like $5 US. I was like, what the hell? Huge bag of fresh mussels. I was just surprised. My wife was like, yeah, we're eating mussels every day. I was like, well, let's not do that. You know, once a week maybe, but every day, you know, Nick doesn't want that. So a lot of shellfish do better off in deeper, colder waters. Just that cold water just tends to grow them better. So keep in mind the molting process. Yeah. Also remember that the only true lobsters are American and European. Okay. We're having a short day today because we're gonna make hot smoked mackerel today for you guys to eat, and we ordered fresh mackerel, and we got frozen mackerel, so we sent it back because when you're gonna cure fish, okay, if you're curing fish for gravlax or you're smoking fish, anything like that, it's better to use fresh. Okay. The reason being is that frozen fish, when you freeze something, right, water expands when it freezes, right? You know how that works, right? If you put a can of water or a bottle of water in the fridge, right, it could explode, right? So water expands things. So think about like on a microscopic level, okay? Think about every cell is a square, okay? Even though it's not, okay? But just in your mind, just to make it easier, every cell is a square. So imagine what happens to all these little squares that are full of water that make up a fish when it freezes. What happens to these? They expand, right? And so a lot of them can rupture, right? And so what happens is that when you thaw that fish out, it becomes waterlogged, okay? The term waterlogged, I don't know how to describe that really in easy to understand words.
Maybe you should explain, like using a plastic water bottle and freezing it.
Well, I'm thinking of the term waterlogged. Who here has seen Pirates of the Caribbean? Pretty much everybody, right? Johnny Depp, Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, you guys all know Pirates of the Caribbean? Yeah. So you always see sometimes that a pirate comes out of the water, or he's been stranded at sea for a long time in water. He's choking water. That's what we call waterlogged. Okay, it's just totally soaked, right? Fish is the same way. If you take a piece of fresh fish and freeze it and then thaw it, the fish that comes out of the freezer is going to be very wet, right? Whereas this fish, remember I mentioned before, it's moist, but it's not wet. Okay? The texture of the fish is firm, it's moist, but it's not wet. So the problem is that when you take fish and you want to cure it, or you want to smoke it, if you want to have a really good final texture, you want to use fresh fish always. Okay? Using frozen fish to cure or smoke is not really the best option. Okay? Yes?
For the molting, what is
Yeah.
the significance to us in terms of cooking for electrostations?
Nothing. It's just an important thing to know.
Oh, okay.
You're probably never going to catch you're never going to get given, like when farmers, when fishermen pull traps in, they check the crabs and stuff, right? And if the crab is in the process of molting, they throw it back because they want it to get bigger, right? So bigger crab means more money, right? So the process of molting is just important to know because it's part of the life cycle of shellfish, right? The more you understand about products, how they grow, how they live, how they work, the better off you are understanding how to use them, how to take care of them. Yeah. All right. Well, anyways, I was going to get some mackerel today to make hot smoked mackerel, but seeing as how we ordered fresh and they sent frozen, we sent it back, and then they said, okay, we can get you fresh. And then they said, but it's frozen, which I still don't understand that one. They're like, yeah, we can get you fresh fish. I'm like, great. And then John mentioned like, but it's also frozen. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, it's flash frozen. I was like, so it's frozen? They're like, yeah. I'm like, so it's not fresh? They're like, yeah. I'm like, so why would you call it fresh? I'm like, well, because it is fresh. I'm like, no, it's frozen. Anyways, so that'll be it for today. I wish we could have made it, but c'est la vie, that's the supplier. So next week we're going to make salmon cakes, next week we're going to make weisswurst, next week we're going to make sauerkraut, and next week we're going to make spätzle. Okay? If you're on the demo team next week, make sure you bring your knives and everything, because you are going to be cutting, cooking, and everything else. Any questions? Sure? Alright, let's get cleaned up and let's get out of here so you guys can take a nice break before your next class.